we will start to let people in the room.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us in this session that will focus on resilience amidst COVID-19, approaches and strategies from the African Policy Dialogue. My name is Desiree Asogbavi. I work for One Campaign as the Francophone Africa Director, and I am a member of the Include platform. Before we move in, let us look quickly at the house rules. This meeting is being simultaneously translated in French and English, so you can use the facility on the Zoom platform to get the language that you prefer. We kindly ask you to mute yourself in order to limit the background noises, and please do not interrupt the flow of the speakers. During the meeting, we will be taking screenshots. If you wish not to be included in the picture, kindly turn your camera off. In order to facilitate interactions with the audience, we will use Slido for polls and questions. Kindly go to the link and use the code provided. You can also download the applications on your phone. The code will be shown on the dialogue box. We really encourage you to share your comments during the discussion, share your reflections, and to ask questions using both the dialogue box on the Zoom platform and the Slido application. During the question and answer sessions, if you want to speak, please use the Zoom function, raise your hand, and wait for the moderator to give you the floor. Thank you very much and welcome again. So we all know how COVID-19 has amplified inequality in the continent. We also observe that local actors have played an important role in mitigating the adverse effects of the pandemic if we compare it to international actors. So the discussion today will highlight the localized approaches and strategies implemented by the African Policy Dialogues that can be used to enhance policy process in Africa in the aftermath of the COVID-19. And this will be in consideration of the diverse contexts and the need to amplify local voices and actors in order to build forward more inclusively. Our African Policy Dialogue are networks of policy actors that aim to encourage the use of existing but also new knowledges in Africa in the policymaking area. Before we dive into the debate, I would like to invite two special people here.
Check audio, check mic, check mic.
Hello, can I proceed?
Yes, please, Desiree, go ahead.
Okay, so I was saying that before we dive in the debate, I would like to invite two special people to do very short welcome remarks. Let me then first invite Professor Njuguna Ndungu, who is the Executive Director of the African Economic Research Consortium, IRC, to take the floor. Prof, you have the floor. Do we have Prof Ndungu?
He's currently not in the meeting.
Okay, so in that case, let me invite the second speaker for the welcome remark. Let me invite Madam Frida Nicolai from the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs for her welcome remark. Frida, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Desiree. My name is Frida Nicolai. I work for the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Department of Stabilization and Humanitarian Aid. I've had a wide range of jobs within the ministry, and I'm very, very pleased to be able to participate in this platform. A very big welcome to everybody. I really hope that we can have a very open and frank debate about this subject that is so important, and that also within the ministry has generated interesting dynamics and discussions about how to proceed and how to advance. Also in the Building Back Better sort of mode, which really, from our perspective, should be called Building Forward Together. So a very big welcome. My eyes and ears are wide open. I really look forward to an informed debate with all these African partners, and please rest assured that I will take on board everything that's being said, and also sketch later a little bit the mood within the ministry as regards to this subject. Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody, and Godspeed.
Thank you very much, Frida, for your very warm remark. It is now time for us to dive in the panel discussion on the inclusions and localizations in decision and policymaking process. We do have a pool of solid speakers that have accepted to join us today. So we have in from Mozambique, Professor Adriano Alfredo Nuvunga, who is the director of the Center for Democracy and Development, CDD. From Ghana, we will have Dr. Nicholas Awartwi, director of the Institute of Local Government Studies. And then from Kenya, we will have Dr. Joyce Kinyanjui, who is the managing director of Zizi Afrique, which is an organization working on improving education in Africa. Then again from Mozambique, this time from the policymaking side, we will have Dr. Pedro Madeira Gilich, who is the advisor to the Minister for Institutional Development. And from Mali, we will have Ms. Verhard Norche, who is the first secretary at the Netherlands Embassy in Mali. So the discussions with the panelists will be moderated by Diana Muchai. Diana is a research manager at the African Economic Research Consortium, IRC. Diana, I hand over the floor to you for the discussion. Do we have Diana online?
Thank you. I'm very sorry because of that. Yeah, thank you very much. And well, to start our discussion, you've already done the introduction of our panelists. One of the things probably I would want to note, even as we start, is that our African policy dialogues basically are networks that aim to encourage the use of existing and new knowledge in policymaking in Africa. The good thing or the benefit of these African policy dialogues is that they understand the context of their countries. And so they play a very key role when it comes to making policies within their countries. And of course, within our context, when it comes to mitigating the adverse effects that, as we have had, they exacerbated the inequalities during the COVID-19. Well, having said that, in this discussion, the first thing we want to do is probably to discuss how demand and context-specific policy influencing approach of our African policy dialogues have been of benefit in the different local settings during the pandemic. And to kick off our discussion, we are going to have, for this first round of discussion, we'll have Professor Adriano Nuvunga, as we have heard, the Director Center for Democracy and Development. And we'll be having Dr. Nicholas, the Director, Institute of Local Government Studies, and also Dr. Joyce Kinyanjui. So the three will kick us off with our first round of discussion. the demand and context-specific policy influencing approach. To start, probably Professor Nuvunga, you may want to give us how within your context, you've been it has been of benefit within your locality, and the way, of course, during this pandemic, you've been able to, to mitigate the adverse effects in this particular time. Over to you, Professor Nuvunga. Professor Nuvunga, probably you can start with Dr. Joyce Kinyanjui.
Sorry, everybody.
Oh, sorry.
Professor Nuvunga is
yes, Maluana, you were saying something?
I'm here. Adrian Nuvunga is already here. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, we can. See you.
Can you see and hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, yes, you can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can indeed.
Yes, we can. Yes, Professor, you can go on. We can hear you, please.
Yes, once again, thank you very much for the opportunity to participate at this important conference here in Mozambique. At our African policy dialogue, we have made a significant contribution where we were able to contribute at. That speaks to two important issues. Number one, when COVID-19 hit Mozambique, the policy response from the government here was, number one, not informed by local knowledge, not informed by the real situation of COVID in Mozambique. On the one hand, there were no existing cases at the moment. Secondly, so government was taking decisions based on what was happening in neighboring countries, particularly South Africa. South Africa is different in terms of its reality to Mozambique and capacity. So number one, Mozambique was taking decision not based on local knowledge, local reality. Number two, government was borrowing, and the policy that government had in place to respond to COVID-19, it was focusing more on macroeconomic issues and stability rather than focusing on social protection, and which is, in our view, the instrument for inclusiveness. And these are the key issues that at the beginning, the APD here in Mozambique had to deal with. So it was with this that was taking place at the moment that APD engaged government, particularly the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Health, to number one, include the Ministry for Social Women, Social Protection and Children. So to refocus the policy response to social protection as a way of inclusiveness. Number two, it was to urge the government to design its policy response not based on what was happening in neighboring countries, because there are different realities, but is to engage think tanks locally for knowledge generation that could help do that. While in the first aspect, we were successful that at the very policy level, government shifted towards social protection, and the meetings were held, including with cell phone companies, as discussions were including possibilities of using mobile money to reach local communities. But on the other side of having the policy response to be based on local reality, it was difficult. And this was difficult because Mozambique went borrowing to the IMF, and the rapid credit facility, which was the mechanism for supporting Mozambique's effort to fight COVID-19, it was IMF driven, IMF centric, and more macroeconomic oriented rather than informed by the reality. And the reality was that of a collapsing healthy infrastructure on the one hand. On the other, and more importantly, it was that Mozambique was already experiencing its biggest socioeconomic crisis since independence because of the odious debt. So it was in this context that APD engaged the government throughout the 2020 year and until February last year. And resulting of our contribution, two things were, as I've indicated, they were improved. The concept of inclusive governance.
Professor, probably you may want to summarize in the interest of time, please, about what came of your intervention. In the interest of time, I just want to remind us it's a very short panel session, so we want all of us to participate. So what basically was the result of your intervention? Yeah.
Yes. The result of our intervention is in terms of having an inclusive policy. So Mozambique's COVID response, resulting of our engagement with government, it was improved to be people and social protection centric. But the reality, however, is that in terms of implementation, when we checked the expenditure, we found out that though we had been successful in influencing government to be inclusive, at least at a policy level, but at the level of implementation, social protection remained underfunded, undersupported. So the inclusiveness that was at the discourse level resulting over engagement, it was not, it couldn't be implemented because government did not allocate enough funds there. This is one. Number two is, though government has improved at the discourse level and has included the social protection ministry, but the actual budget allocation and the distribution and the center of gravity of the government response to COVID, it remained macroeconomic centric and business, private sector oriented to undertake the infrastructures which in our view were activated in order to facilitate bad governance in a form of misuse and corruption. So in reality, though we have made a significant contribution, but that did not result in effectively local communities benefiting of the COVID-19 rapid credit facility supported by the IMF.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Probably I would pose a question to Dr. Joyce Kinyanchi. Was your experience any different within your locality? As Professor has already said that they did some policies without being informed first. You know, they were not informed by the existing knowledge. So they went ahead and did some policy. Was your experience any different? And if it was any different, how did you come in to intervene at that particular point? And probably I would request you to be as brief as possible so that you can have the other speakers, you know, also have time to share the experience. Thank you, Dr. Joyce.
Sorry, I was trying to, yes, I was trying
to
talk when I was muted. So sorry. Thank you, Diana. Our experience was slightly different from Mozambique. In Kenya, we began implementing things without policies. We didn't rush into doing policies. So with COVID, one of the things the government thought of doing is community-based learning. This is where communities were to come together and meet in large social halls or under trees or any open place within the localities. And then would have the government coming in to work with community leaders and administrators. So it's a good idea. And it has worked in other countries where there have been pandemics or other crises. But we didn't have a policy. So we actually had a parent go to court and stopped that program by the government, community-based learning, and the High Court stopped that. So there, because of lack of guiding policy, and policy making in Kenya requires a lot of consultation, so that was stopped. So we did miss as a country an opportunity to do something about our children's learning because of lack of a policy. And we've raised that issue in one of the policy dialogues. We discussed that. And that policy right now by the Ministry of Education is giving it first priority. You know, it's one of the policies that need to be done. Now, the second one, as schools reopened, the candidates class reopened in September of 2020. You know, people started talking of missing learners in school, and they were not traceable. Nobody could tell where they were. And the government was very adamant. Everyone had to come back to school. So again, relooking at our school reentry, normally it focuses on girls. We've only been talking so much about school reentry for girls. but the boys are equally missing. Many have gone to those who started businesses or started working to earn some money. Some didn't report. And that remains a crisis because government data shows for the primary level end of cycle exams, 12,000 learners were missing. And then when you come to the secondary level examination, out of the cohort that did their primary exam in 2016, almost 200,000 were missing. So we have a lot of learners missing, and those, remember, just the exam classes. So if we look at all the other classes that are not exam classes, I think the number of children who've dropped out. So that re-entry needs to be looked at. The policy is there, but I think the support that schools require for that. But we did discuss the risks that children fell into because of closure. Now, the other intervention by government was digital learning. So of course, like any other country, I guess we know the reality. Not many people have, not every home in Kenya has a radio or a television, but that was the focus of the government. Community learning could have come in handy, but with digital learning, the government has just concluded research on status of learning and parental engagement during school closure. And learners, only about 33% were able to access television, and radio was 53.4%. So I think one of the policy dialogues we want to hold is to share this data that we are aware COVID is with us for some time, vaccination is low, so we don't know whether we'll be having intermittent closure or what the future looks like in this pandemic. So, so that is something that we need to address, learning during the pandemic. So that has been our experience. We've talked on inclusion, special needs. Again, they were not covered. When you only do intervention through radio and TV, then again, you leave out a large number. So issues of inclusion, during learning in this time of pandemic or any other disaster. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Joyce, for that a good discussion. Probably would want to hear the experience from Ghana. Dr. Nicholas, how has your context-specific policy influencing approach of the APD within your country been of benefit in your country? And has it been different from the previous countries you have been heard from? If there's any particular difference from their approach, please, probably you can highlight that briefly, and so that you can move forward. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Nicholas.
Thanks very much, Diana. Yes, the approach from Ghana quite different from the previous speakers, and also from my experience in doing some similar thing in Kenya and Nigeria, and also in Uganda. But in the Ghana's context, we were looking at how do we promote the ideals of democratic local governance that will promote local economic transformation. In the case of Ghana, it has implemented decentralization for the past 30 years with the idea of empowering local governments to promote local development processes and to respond to local challenges and local problems. But over the 30 years that we've implemented, the center is still strong, and attempts to empower local governments politically and fiscally and economically have always been 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And many people have asked for reforms, but we've had decentralization policy reforms, but progress so far has been slow. So the platform idea was, how do we do research on local governance issues and use that to inform policy discussions on the decentralization and to change the policy and programs that have been implemented. A window of opportunity opened in 2019 when the government attempted a major constitutional reform to change basically many of the decentralization issues. However, 3 weeks to that major referendum, the president canceled the referendum, citing a number of reasons, and one of them was disagreement with the opposition, or the idea that there was no consensus among the major parties. So our platform at that time felt like, how do we bring the discussions back? How do we engage the government to reform the decentralization program? So we did a lot of research, and we did mapping of the key actors that can inform and influence the policy change. We brought all of these actors into a proper mapping and look at who has the power to inform and influence it, who has the interest to let things happen, who has the incentive to push for the agenda change, and who has the power. And so we did this analysis, and whilst we're doing this, we're also doing the research on the key areas. Then in March, the COVID-19 hit Ghana. Restrictions were imposed, and we couldn't launch the program. So whilst there, we discussed how do we engage policy in a COVID situation where we are restricted in terms of engaging, using the traditional means of having a forum, meeting together to share ideas. How do you do that? So for 3 months, we were in a limbo on what to do. Then during discussions, the idea came, why don't you do a research on COVID? Because local governments were given, as a result of the COVID, local governments were given responsibilities. And yet the same local government that have struggled because the center is overbearing in so many areas were asked to take on new responsibilities of COVID. So when we started doing the study, then the same local government were telling us that they were not able to respond effectively because of the decentralization policy issues. So whilst we could not go to them and engage them on local governance issues in the time of COVID, because it would have been strange for people to start talking about decentralization when we are in the middle of a pandemic. However, as we took the opportunity to discuss local government response and resilience to COVID, now they brought in the issue of the decentralization policy, and we took advantage of that, got all the information. Then in July, the restrictions were eased a bit. So we launched the program under COVID protocols. Now, this is where the game changing came as to how do you engage differently. So Zoom came, now the use of electronic media became major important means of communicating. In the past, we had used a traditional approach, meeting forum, but now we're using social media. So our WhatsApp group has more numbers than any possibility of doing a forum in even a huge conference. Then, instead of occasional meetings to discuss policy issues, now with the WhatsApp group, every day debate is going on. And the WhatsApp group has all the key actors that have the power, that has the interest to inform and influence the policy. So every now and every day, the issues come up, we discuss. Now moving on, we realize that doing a video coverage is important. Using the TV stations. So something that we had not conceived of doing, now we have a discussion going on with the national television station to organize a weekly program on local governance issues using studies that we have done. So this was something that we never anticipated, that we thought, once a while we can engage television discussions. But here we go, because of COVID, something that was on the periphery that comes in once a while, now is becoming a major weekly program, and which will be starting very soon. Second, we are also beginning to track who comes to our forum, in terms of our WhatsApp group, our Facebook, our YouTube, our Twitter page. Who are those? And then so we are tracking them. And so whilst we are tracking them, it also helps us to know who are the key actors who are practically engaging us every day, something that we wouldn't have done if COVID had not come. And the use of Zoom now is such that there are more people who come on our programs, our electronic media than in the past it had been.
Okay,
So these are the changes that we have introduced in our system of engaging policy actors.
Thank you very much. I can see that you have had quite a number of changes, and probably as COVID came, you know, it's like it opened our eyes of some of the things we hadn't thought of doing. Probably before we get back to the three of you have just gone with the discussions, would want to hear some intervention from one of the policymakers here on how best, because as we listen to the discussion, we are still hearing some, what do you call it? There's that disconnect between the things that we are doing and the government implementing them. So we'd want to hear how best we can establish and build strategic partnerships and alliances between actors in the countries to build forward more inclusively. And probably to start off with this particular discussion is Buddy. Buddy is the head of SME Development Division, Mali Investment Promotion Agency. Probably, Buddy, you've been in a position to tell us, having listened to our previous speakers, how can we establish these partnerships so that it's not only them who are having ideas to implement and talking to the government, and the government, on the other hand, is not really, you know, implementing, and they are very good ideas. And you know that our African Policy Dialogue members, they are doing really a great job. Over to you, Buddy. Buddy, are you with us? So as we wait for Buddy to probably join and tell us more about how we can build the partnerships, I would throw it back to Professor Nuvunga. Probably what would want to hear from you is, having said that they did policy response not being informed by local knowledge, and they borrowed, you know, the ideas from the neighboring countries, looking at then and now. What would you say that you would do to ensure that the government is going to probably do, or rather make policies that are informed by knowledge, by local knowledge from your from where you sit at the APD? What would you do to ensure that they do it if, for instance, we had such a pandemic or such a circumstance that would happen, you know, without us being prepared to sort of, you know, deal with it? Professor Nuvunga.
Thank you very much for this question. What we have done as a Mozambique policy dialogue, we have started to issue a monthly analysis of the COVID situation, looking at the policy, but also the trends of the expenditure, showing that although at at a policy level, government claims to being inclusive, but in reality, that was not. And in reality, what we have been systematically showing is that government policy response, it has continued the very same patterns of relatively good policies, inclusive in the aspect of inclusiveness, of governance, of inclusive governance. But when it comes to allocation and implementation for inclusive policies, that is not happening. This is on the one hand. On the other hand, we have organized a conference where key ministries attended, and we have shared the results. As of then, we see changes. Government has organized 2 conferences, and they have made the National Scientific Committee to start to be open and take questions from the public, from civil society particularly, but also to issue regular statements on how they viewed the situation to evolve.
Okay, thank you.
If you give me 1 second.
Yes, 1 second.
But the problem is, before this was consolidated, government moved policy focus to vaccination. And again, vaccination is taking the very same mistakes that we have seen and we have been engaging to be improved from the initial policy response. So vaccination is taking place, but it is underpinned by the very same problems that I have alluded to in my initial intervention.
Thank you very much. At this point, I would allow Vahat, sorry if I don't mention your name well, Vahat, to say something before we hand it back to the chair. Thank you.
Oui, bonjour, c'est Noortje ici. Je suis désolée pour être un peu en retard. Est-ce que vous m'entendez bien? Oh, sorry, I can speak in English. Do you understand me well?
Yes, yes.
On vous entend bien, madame.
Okay, thank you. So can I react a little bit on the first point of the agenda? Is that where you are at?
Yes, you can briefly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this invitation. I think it's a topic that is very much relevant. That's very relevant also in the Malinese context at this moment. In Mali, we are dealing with multiple challenges at the moment, as many of you may know. COVID is one, but security is another. Violent extremism on top of this. And in fact, all these developments very much show that a context-specific localized approach is very much needed to improve and the situation, to achieve our results and not to make things worse. The embassy is working a lot with civil society organizations, international NGOs, national NGOs, but also local NGOs. And especially the local NGOs have been very instrumental to be able to continue our programs, especially the programs in relation to sexual and reproductive health and rights and gender equality and female entrepreneurship. Because local organizations can still very much address local demands and be very context specific, but can also be more flexible And they can do that much better than the NGOs in Bamako. And these NGOs also very much acknowledge that. And this localized approach is very much needed also in terms of insecurity. So we work in communities with all different types of stakeholders to discuss women's rights, for example, and sexual and reproductive health and rights, and to see really where the resistance is and how to deal with that resistance. And that's everywhere different. It has everywhere a different face. So on that basis, we can work on different strategies and also be flexible in our strategies to work, for example, to increase the demand for family planning services and to provide commodities. However, what happened during COVID is that people avoided going to health centers, for example, and that also a lot of donor money was going to corona prevention instead of actually continuing essential SRHR services. So that is very also important to get data and information from communities to see how we can best address that, and also not to leave them out, to exclude them in all our efforts. In terms of policy influencing, I read the word and I was like, wow, that actually has quite a different meaning at the moment, because, well, the state, especially in the north and the center, is often not there at all, or they are there, but they are very much under influence of violent extremism, or cannot actually make any decisions, or have a great lack of resources. So also there, it is very important to know what's going on, but to also be careful that we are not substituting the state, that we take all the roles without any way of knowing how sustainable that will be. Well, I think, and maybe last but not least, I think it's very difficult also to visit our partners to see really what they do. However, like they have very, they can be a source of very rich information. So we are looking for ways also to really tap into these stories. And to see how also different partners can come together to share these stories, and to make sure that we address the real needs instead of what we think is needed here from Bamako. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vahat. I'm sorry, Vahat is the first secretary at the Dutch Embassy in Mali, responsible for SRHR and chapter. Sorry, I didn't do that introduction for you. And you're very grateful for the comments you've given out to us. Now, I would want to give back the floor to the chair for the next session. Thank you very much. Desiree, back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Diana. Thanks to all the panelists and the participants who have been reacting as well. I would like to check if I understood that Professor Njunguna was able to join us. If he's around, if he wants to pick one or two things, to share with us. Do we have Professor Njunguna online?
Yes, I'm there now. Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. I missed this because my sound wasn't moving, and I kept on seeing you talking, but and then I couldn't hear you. Then I decided to do my phone, and then it also had a problem. But then by the time my phone was giving me all the things, but I'm not so sure you could see me. Anyway, this is a very interesting debate. I'm sorry about that delay, but I think what I can do is that let me take maybe 2 minutes, just first of all, to actually welcome you to this meeting of INCRUDE. But also, having listened to all the experiences, maybe I can make not more than 4 points. Let me make some quick 4 points. First, the first issue is, what are the emerging nations? And we are very happy about this because the emerging nations are very important in terms of the strategy for the future, but also continuing with the experiences that we are running from people. And one of them was to how do we safeguard against disruptions in the technology of managing pandemics? And then we have heard about education, we have heard about communication, but for me, that is very, very important. I think the most important thing is to safeguard disruptions. In the East African region, we even try to deal with the cross-border trade and even trucks passing through the East African community. But the running process was very, very important for us. And that is something that we really need to work on. And I've given several examples. For us at the ERC, we continued with our running process, and I kept Marine informed about this. But we could actually provide bandwidth, and we met the cost of internet connectivity and bandwidth. But you cannot control electricity outages. And even here, I even suffer the same. So essentially, that's something, it's a very important aspect we have run, that we can actually move, avoid the disruptions and go to the digital space. The second thing is how we deal with markets and disruptions in markets. But one of the most important celebrated outcomes when I see this is quickly, due to lockdowns, countries emerged and tried even to develop in a very big way, in a very quick way, targeted social protection during the lockdown. This may have covered only the urban people and perhaps the elderly across the countries, but that was very, very encouraging because it was very, very important. The second thing is that fiscal space is always important. This is again from the national governments and fiscal space. Government needs a policy lever or a policy handle to deal with emergencies. And this found most of the countries in a very tight spot. But of course, the private sector and private individuals came in to help. But it's a lesson that we really need to do, to look at in terms of when we are looking at the fiscal policy, we also have to ask ourselves, what is the fiscal space that is available? The third point for me is very important that the digital space for those countries that could use them were very, very important for learning, for contact tracing, and everything was very, very important. And for me, I will continue telling African countries especially that inclusiveness includes also the physical infrastructure that we really need to build, and let the private sector and individuals and households take up the core infrastructure to connect themselves. And finally, we are going to talk about the post-COVID economic recovery strategy. But that means that we are going to talk about those areas that we have already covered. And one of them is we were good at protecting lives and livelihoods, but we need now to go into the next step on how to protect private investments. The second thing is, how do we protect and regulate the markets? Because that is where economic rent is shared and distributed. But more importantly, downstream, it encourages productivity. And third, how do we step up digital physical infrastructure for fiber optic cable so that everyone is able to reach the markets? And finally, is how do we make sure that we can actually come up with a strategy for domestic resource mobilization that covers fiscal policy as well as even taxation, specifically taxation, so that we are able to actually incentivize and provide room for government to create its own fiscal space. I am reacting to those lessons that I have heard and listened, but I'm also looking forward in terms of post-COVID economic recovery. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Njuguna. Thanks for being able finally, to jump in and bring a very valuable contributions again. So before I wrap up, I'd like to check if Frida want to have like a quick last thoughts, given the communications, the panel discussions before I wrap up. Is Frida there?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Desiree. Yes, I'll be very brief and therefore will not be able to do justice to everything that has been said. It is so incredibly interesting and mind-boggling to hear the differences of emphasis and perspectives from various country contexts. And this is exactly the reason why we need to have these kinds of discussions to be able to really delve into national contexts together determine where we can focus on what. Very briefly, in 3 words, within the ministry, the COVID outbreak pandemic has resulted in a very huge debate within the ministry on how to do things better and to make sure that if all else fails, there are basics available to people in need that are sustainable and that they can still sort of build upon and survive upon. So within the ministry, this localization approach, as it's being called, is definitely a political space and room to maneuver that I think we should try and explore together. There are many different ways of focusing within the various thematic departments. I've seen some colleagues are online also. There's various approaches to this whole issue, but context specificity is absolutely key. And we are currently looking with various departments to our embassies and partners that we work through, where we see opportunity for engagement in this regard. And from our perspective, it is very clear that we need to look for kind of a group of willing parties that are wanting to engage, to be able to indeed find those spots where we can indeed focus on getting the real sustainable ways forward in the countries at hand above board. And from the perspectives of the various countries, I've heard there are such huge differences in where the focus is now in this COVID period. And I think we really, and I really want to say this in this meeting, we really need each other to be able to focus and determine and choose where we can engage most usefully together to make sure that the impact of the things that we are still able to do and will be able to do again in the future is safeguarded as much as possible, and is made much stronger through this what we call this new strategic lens. So I would very much like to indicate to all of you that our door is very much open. We really feel that it is necessary to engage together in this debate. This little hour is useful, but really inadequate to really delve down into the nitty-gritty of things. And I just want to thank you very much for organizing this thing. I think I hope it would be a first of many. And thank you for that. And please do not hesitate to contact us wherever you feel that might be useful or opportune. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Frida. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now getting to the close of the sessions. If you forget everything that was said, I just want to mention that a few things that I pick up here. So today we have tried basically to understand the localized approaches and strategy implemented by the African Policing Dialogue that can be used even post-COVID-19. It was clear from all the interventions that responses must be based on local contexts and not necessary to be copied and pasted from another geographical location. Also, the consideration of local facts and existing knowledge could have catalyzed a stronger impact. That was one of the lessons that we could go home with. And also, action without policy met some challenges in Kenya, as it was explained. We have had some learning from also experience that can be used as we move on. In other cases, we have seen that the government system has tested local government practice to see if this is something that we can take on if such a situation appears. And that seems to be something we can look at as we move on. In other situations, such as in Mali, for example, where we have had multiple challenges, it was more true and more evident that local context is important because you had to be dealing with different other issues in the same field. It will also highlight that moving ahead, we need to avoid disruption. So we have to be more prepared, technology-wise, electricity-wise, power-wise, as we move on. And maybe one last lesson is that we need to look at fiscal space, as one of the opportunity to be able to face, the challenge of something like the pandemic or anything that may happen in the future. And using the same opportunity so we can face the situations, looking at fiscal space, the intervention of local business, for example, as we have seen it in some countries. So let me just stop here and use the opportunity to thank you all for your intervention, your contributions. Despite some technical challenges, you were able all to give valuable interventions. Thanks for those who have been helping us in the shadow to make this happen. I will now conclude these sessions. Please, I would like to ask you not to hang up. Stay where you are. We just want to observe a few minutes pause before the next session, which is going to be the conclusion of all the sessions. So don't hang up. Keep your connection on, and we will be back just in a few minutes for the closing session.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to continue with the next session. I think we're 1 or 2 minutes early, but in the interest of time, I would like to take up those extra minutes for our discussions rather than for a break in between sessions. In this last session, we're going to do a few things. First, we're going to have a brief wrap up in the sense of presenting some of the conference highlights from the past week, and then talk about innovation strategies for a post-pandemic Africa. And we have a very interesting group of people who are going to talk about that in 2 ways. First, we're going to have Mavis Ovoju Gyamfi, who's Executive Vice President of ACED, a think tank on African development, who's going to give us a keynote address. And then subsequently, we have 2 people, Dr. Chiamaka Nwachukwu, who's coordinator of the African Union African Youth Charter Hustlers Program, and Amanda Kabagambe, who is with Bethel Advisors, who are going to talk about the youth perspective. Now, I will start briefly by talking about the conference highlights from the past few days. If we look at the conference on building forward more inclusively, what we see is that that we aimed at promoting knowledge on how to design and implement policies for more inclusive development, reducing both poverty and inequality. Now, in the context of COVID-19 pandemic, this aim has become even more urgent. So thinking about how to deal with the pandemic itself and about designing post-COVID strategies, recovery strategies in ways that promote inclusivity and well-being are quite essential. Now, in the past several days, we've heard quite a diversity of perspectives and of actors who've identified new knowledge gaps, who've identified ways of going forward, opportunities that were seized, which had not been foreseen. And that is actually quite an interesting in terms of some of the processes that have been going on, which are not like the pandemic itself, cannot be predicted, but present both opportunities as well as very great challenges. On our first day, we had several speakers who sketched the main contours of the pandemic and the results of the research, the comparative research program that Include as Knowledge Platform has been doing on COVID and inequality. To start with that, for many African countries, COVID was a crisis within already existing crises. Existing inequalities were exposed by the mitigation and support measures taken against the effects of COVID, and sometimes ended up worsening them because governments did not take vulnerabilities of different groups sufficiently into account. The responses of government, as we've just been hearing in this past session, differed in their intensity, in their spread, and in terms of their targeting of beneficiaries. The pandemic has also exposed weaknesses in the relation between the state and citizens in terms of low levels of consultation and participation of citizens in setting measures, and the lack of government data on which to base countermeasures effectively. Now, the policymakers in the opening session looked at ways in which a post-COVID recovery could be designed. They highlighted that COVID crisis is not the only one. The issue of climate change effects, the issue of economic growth that produces more employment, especially for youth, are two concurrent crises that also need to be addressed in conjunction with each other. And several measures were suggested, but in the interests of time, I'm not going to go into them now, but if you're interested, we can come back to that. In the next two sessions, we focus more specifically on perspectives on decent employment for Africa's youth post-pandemic, zooming in on the case of Uganda specifically. And a very interesting, innovative combination of focus came out of these discussions, leading to an integrated approach, which was termed a human economy with youth at its heart. And that is quite a change in thinking when people, and particular groups of people, are put at the heart of the economy rather than economic growth and business per se. But this change in focus means that the classic themes of the need for further education and skills trainings were recognized, as they should be, with the emphasis on higher secondary and tertiary education, but that also issues of infrastructure, the need for providing digital access to youth across the board, is a necessary precondition for lifelong learning. And these kind of structural factors have come up again and again in this conference as issues which need to be addressed to actually move towards a more inclusive way of development. Speakers also recognized a very clear shift in thinking. Solutions offered now not only recognize the importance of education and training as such, but focus much more on the structural causes of unemployment versus just thinking of about a decade ago. And these have to do with the structure of many African economies, where a combination of large-scale employment in the informal economy and the predominance of employment in agriculture are still major issues that need to be addressed. now what you see is that agriculture is being considered as a sector with the potential for growth to absorb large numbers of young people. However, for that to happen, it needs to be included in positive ways into local, regional, and when strong enough, global value chains. One of the issues that came up very strongly was the existing digital divide. There is a need for the internet and the digital economy to become based more on much more inclusive infrastructure, and the ways in which the private sector and government need to work together was brought out in some of the discussions. The case of Uganda brought out several more interesting issues. And the first one was that the focus on jobs for youth needs to be incorporated and included into the policy designs and programs of every ministry, not just the employment ministry. That means that macroeconomic, trade and investment policy and infrastructure projects should also include a focus on what they mean for employment. Second, one of the main issues that came out was that youth themselves should be included in these policy discussions. They should be recognized and included as partners rather than as subjects in these policy and program designs. And finally, in terms of the economic factors, agriculture is seen as an interesting starting point for a larger value chain-based development. And in that perspective, access to finance and skilling are important factors in private sector development and should be seen as such. Our fourth session turned to the issue of modeling social protection responses on the African continent. The discussion showed that the way of looking at social protection has changed fundamentally as well in the last decade, moving away from the idea of safety nets to seeing social spending, social protection spending, as an investment for economic development. And that is indeed a major change, as we've been seeing in the Include platform, where we've been working on this topic for the last 13, 14 years. The variety of social protection models reflects the assumed benefits of the different channels, strategies, and targeted groups. But empirical research in the continent increasingly shows that cash transfers to households are a major effective way of providing basic incomes, higher levels of nutrition, and also have important spillover effects, such as the ability to participate in social networks, which themselves, again, provide more social protection. That issue of spillover effects is essential in increasing human well-being, productivity, and participation in society, and therefore together supports long-term resilience in society in the end. And that is what social protection is aiming for. We also had a discussion on how governments should be thinking about expanding social protection, which is possible in terms of costs. 5% of national budgets on average was mentioned, but that requires social protection issues to be made political, in which support for such measures has to be mobilized. Currently, middle classes do not want to pay higher taxes for such purposes, and that is a more universal problem. And political parties are sometimes interested in quid pro quos when they support such measures. And here we felt there was an important role for civil society organizations to play in discussions on producing a new social contract between state and society. That role is also there for the private sector, recognizing that people with the higher levels of well-being are also more productive over their lifetime. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go into the results of our discussions on the APDs this previous session, as Desiree has very ably summarized and indicated the highlights of that discussion. So if you will forgive me, I won't do that, but go straight to our speakers for this session. I would like to give Mavis Ovosi Gyamfi the word, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Issa. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here with all of you today. If it's okay, I'd like to share my screen. So if you bear with me for a second. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, so it's a pleasure and honor to join all of you at the conference today. From the summary that Issa has just given, I can see that you've had a very rich and fruitful discussion over the past few days. And in my speaking points, I'm going to touch on a number of these areas. So let's begin with the rather grueling experience that the planet has gone through over the last 18 months. As we navigated the COVID-19 crisis. We've had millions of lives lost as a result of this crisis, and may their souls rest in peace. Many families have lost their loved ones. Children have lost parents, and parents have lost children. But apart from the tragic human consequences of the pandemic, the economic impact has been devastating. I mean, the UN estimates that in 2020, the global economy lost 1 trillion in GDP as a result of the pandemic. And despite the uncertainty ahead with the virus, and especially the different variants that we are seeing across the world, we are beginning to see light at the end of the tunnel. The IMF is projecting global growth to be 5.8% in 2021. And this is a big jump from the negative 4.9% growth that we saw in 2020. So that's the global picture. So what happened in Africa? Well, like other continents, we were affected by the pandemic. The health impact to date was not as devastating as had initially been projected. And thus far, it has not been. Now, this is not to undermine the almost 136,000 lives lost to date. Every life matters. And so it's a sadness that we've lost so much on the continent thus far. But the economic impact on Africa has been truly devastating. And I'll come back to that in a minute. As you discussed on day one, COVID is just another crisis that most African countries are navigating. So for example, we talked about the 2014 to 2016 Ebola epidemic that led to the loss of over 11,000 lives in the affected regions and cost those countries an estimated 53 billion. DRC is dealing with an outbreak of Ebola right now, and it dealt with it in 2020. So on top of navigating COVID, it was dealing with Ebola. In 2020, the locust outbreak in East Africa left over 20 million people in the sub-region on the brink of food insecurity. Countries in the Sahel and Horn of Africa are dealing with insurgency and conflict. Poverty on the continent, where we were seeing progress, we're beginning to see regression, and youth unemployment and underemployment were crises that countries were still navigating. And these are some of just a few of the examples of the things that people were navigating, African countries were navigating, whilst the rest of the world was navigating COVID-19. So they were dealing with all these things as well as the impact of COVID-19. But the interesting thing is that throughout all of these crises, Africans have been innovative in navigating the crisis and finding solutions to minimize the impact. Anybody who's read the reports on the Ebola crisis, eventually it was pretty evident that most of the homegrown solutions were actually the things that kept the Ebola until we got the vaccinations for Ebola. So we've just got to remember that as a continent, we seem to do phenomenally well in coming together and finding innovations to deal with crisis. So let's go through how we've dealt with COVID. Firstly, we must commend African leaders that work together with the AU and the agencies and partners to respond to this crisis. And often we don't say that. We often say leadership is our Achilles, but to give African nations credit, most African nations actually came together. They ceded some authority to Africa CDC to agree national protocols to minimize the spread of the disease. And they are now collaborating with Africa CDC to negotiate with the international community on how to access vaccines. And as part of this negotiation, they are also negotiating, access to the patents so that they can facilitate local production. And I'm especially excited about the discussion on the production, not just of the vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine, but also other vaccines that the continent needs. We are a long way away, and we need to work out which countries would lead on the production, how the value chains will work, etc. But we are moving in the right direction. Secondly, we saw countries working with the AU Economic Envoys and UNECA to navigate and address the liquidity crisis that most of them were facing, and to find ways in which they could deal with their fiscal shortages without over-exacerbating what was a debt problem in a number of countries. And so by working together, these countries were able to influence the IMF members to extend the debt servicing initiative timeline to the end of 2020. They were able to influence the issuance of a 650 billion special drawing rights. Now, even though African nations are only expected to receive 33.6 billion of these special drawing rights because of the size of our economies, they have worked together with other countries to really encourage the IMF and its members to explore the development of new instruments that will enable the richer countries to either on-lend their SDRs, which they are unlikely to use, or to find a way of using it to guarantee more affordable loans to countries on the continent. Using this platform that has been created, we are also seeing that countries are beginning to challenge the cost of borrowing in Africa. So for example, we are asking questions like, how do we create a fairer rating system so that the country like Ghana, which has the same debt to GDP ratio as Italy, can borrow at the same rate of circa 1.9% rather than more than twice the rate, which is currently a minimum of 4%. Thirdly, we have seen the private sector come together under the AU private sector group in a way that we haven't seen before. So working to help countries with food banks, computers for homeschooling, helping hospitals to access PPE kits. Some of them were working with small and medium enterprises. And for me, probably my most favorite example of every crisis, and at the same time, probably my most heartbreaking as well, is the innovations we see with young people during a crisis. So we saw it under Ebola, we see it under other crises, we see it as part of the unemployment crisis that they are navigating. And under Ebola, we saw solar-powered and wooden foot-operated washing centers for people to wash their hands in Ghana and Kenya. We saw an engineering student in Nigeria and another in Senegal designing ventilators at a time when we didn't think we would have enough ventilators. We saw a young South African lady using 3D printers to mass produce masks, and a young Ivorian developing hand sanitizers with awareness messages to try and minimize the spread of fake news. So this is all great. We are innovative, we are dynamic, and we are responsive when it comes to a crisis. However, we don't seem to have figured out how to nurture and sustain these initiatives post a crisis. We have failed to support the deepening and scale up of innovations to ensure that not only are we more resilient to withstand future shocks, but we can build on these innovations to generate employment opportunities for our rapidly growing young population. And like one of the things that we saw in this crisis, like other crises in countries across the continent, is that the gains that we have made in the SDGs are regressing. So Issa, you referenced the impact on education, the impact on gender equity, the impact on health, the impact of food security, etc. I mean, the numbers of girls that are being projected will not return to school is something that should really worry the continent, given our growing young population and our desperate need to scale up that population to take advantage of, to be able to be fully employed. But the one thing that was different with COVID, okay, in 2020 was that it was a global crisis. For the first time, our partners were not able to come to our aid at the same pace and level that they had done in other crises, because they were navigating their own crisis. Yes, they came to our aid, but the level was substantially lower than we have seen in the past. So we need to use this lesson to ensure that the losses and lessons that we learned from this crisis does not go to waste. And as we emerge out of the crisis, it's looking very likely that it will be 2022 for us rather than 2021. We need to think about not just building back better, we must focus on building forward better and more inclusively, as per the title of this conference. So how do we do it? If I may start by sharing my screen. Sorry, please bear with me. I'm trying to navigate my slide. Can you see the second slide? Fantastic. Okay. So what we need to do is we need to build back better by transforming our economies. The African Center for Economic Transformation, the organization I am with, is going to be releasing its next Africa Transformation Index later this year. The emerging data shows that whilst Africa is growing, it is still not transforming. If anything, we are actually regressing. So over the last 10 years, our transformation progress has gone backwards rather than forwards. So what do we need to do to transform? And I'd like to bring your attention to the debt slide that we have in front of us. And I hope you can see it fully. To transform, we believe that we need growth with depth. So we need the kind of growth that enables us to diversify our economies, our products, and our exports. We need to make the transition from an unnecessary dependence on raw materials. We need to be competitive in the global market, and we need to increase our exports. We need to enhance our productivity, and enhancing our productivity requires enhancing productivity of human resources, ensuring that we have the infrastructure to facilitate productivity, ensuring that we are able to have the kind of regulatory frameworks that enhances productivity on the continent. Fourthly, we need to grow in a way that takes advantage of technology. We talk a lot about our young innovations, and I'll be talking later on about our hubs and ecosystems. But actually, if you look at how we are using technology, we are using it as examples. They are a hub here, and every other week you hear about another new great use of technology, but we are not scaling it up to make our economies more efficient. And however we grow, if our growth is not improving our human well-being with decent jobs, with access to health services, with access to education, with an ability to provide social protection when we need it, as you've discussed earlier, then to be honest, the purpose of our growth is almost irrelevant. It benefits a handful, and we continue to see inequalities on the continent. And this is why our next transformation report at ASSET is saying that when we are building back better, when we are thinking of growth with depth, we must really focus on the 4 binding constraints that the continent needs to navigate right now. The first one is youth and employment. Okay, 1/5 of our global population is under the age of 25. And they reside in sub-Saharan Africa. We have the world's youngest region, and it is growing at a rapid rate. The region's working population is expected to reach 600 million in 2030 with a youth share, and we will have a youth share of 37% in the world, which is bigger than we have that is in what is in China. Now, translating this youth growth into a demographic dividend could create an additional 500 billion in annual economic growth over the 30-year period. Those of you who saw our countries grappling with liquidity because of low tax revenues during the crisis can just appreciate how much this money is needed for the continent. And to do this, we will have to create an average of 18 million high productive and decent jobs a year between now and 2035. And I'm not talking about selling SIM cards on the street. I'm talking about quality, productive, and decent jobs. This is 6 times what we are currently creating on the continent. So how do we need to do this? We need to ensure that our young people have the technical and soft skills needed by businesses in the 21st century. We have a continent where we have a high number of unemployment, and we have a number of businesses who say that we can't get people to employ on the continent. That disconnect does not make sense. We need to bridge that gap. And the innovations that we are seeing today out of COVID, the business engagement we are seeing today, we need to really build on this to ensure that we can generate those jobs that are needed for young people. But most importantly, as Issa said here earlier on, and you've all been discussing, this is not about a group of business people sitting here and ministers sitting here in a room and talking to each other and coming out to tell the youth how we're going to create this for them. We need to do this in concert with young people on the continent. And to give young people credit, they have created so many platforms through which they mobilize themselves and say, talk to us. Let's use those platforms effectively. The second area that we have picked is climate. And climate is a large and growing crisis on the African continent that I feel is having a major impact on our lives and livelihoods, but we are skirting around it. We need to manage climate risks by promoting climate smart agriculture, protecting green and blue ecosystems, and exploiting renewable energy, and looking at different ways in which we can then generate employment opportunities through the evolutions and opportunities that might come out of climate. There are risks, but if we manage it carefully, we will have opportunities. The third area is digital innovation. As I said earlier, we have hubs and pockets of innovation, but we lack an ecosystem to support improvements and facilitate scale up. This is one of the reasons that the great innovations that we have seen in past crises have struggled to scale up. Let's make sure that this does not happen as we build back better. And we can do this if governments provide the right regulatory environment and businesses across different sectors, finance, technology, etc., collaborate to develop the kind of ecosystem that innovators can get on board on, idealize, pilot, and grow and scale their innovations. Now, we know that supporting the emergence of an innovation ecosystem will enable the private sector, including young people in the private sector, to deliver digital technology and digital access, which we desperately need, to create jobs. And we know that jobs that are created in the digital sector actually benefits women more than it does men. So given the levels of unemployment for women in the continent, we need to grow this sector. We can boost productivity through improved technology and subsequently reduce poverty. The fourth area we're talking about is integrating to transform. Now, everybody's excited about the Continental Free Trade Area. And it's a great first step, but we are still working in isolation as countries. Our ability to transform depends on our ability to integrate and build synergies and allow our economies to go to scale. Now, we came together to deal with COVID and the consequences. Let's not forget that. Let's build on that opportunity, and let's use this experience to continue to work together to make the Continental Free Trade Area work for all Africans. Now, coming together to deal with global public goods such as roads, power, the ability of people to move from one hub to another, and to build centers of excellence will enable us to compete with the rest of the world. The EU, which is my comparator for the free trade area, has centers of excellence, and these centers of excellence compete with the rest of the world and facilitate effective trade amongst your EU countries. I'm sitting in London, and it's a bit rich me saying this, but I'm going to go with it anyway. London pre-Brexit was the finance hub for the EU, and it competed so well on behalf of the European Union with the New York Stock Exchange, with Shanghai, etc. We need to do something similar. We need to reshape our markets. We need to build our centers of excellence. We need to create new industries and expand new sectors for the continent. And by doing this, we can increase growth in exports and we can develop more complex goods and services. It will also enable us to go from the proposed 500 billion through the free trade area to a potential 1 trillion if we do it properly. But all of this is nice. We need leaders. We need visionary leaders in government. We need visionary leaders in business. We need visionary leaders in the youth. We need visionary leaders in civil society. But we are all leaders. And somehow we keep talking about these people, visionary leaders. It seems to bemoan us. We need to be the leaders we are and hold the people we vote into power to account. We need to be the leaders we are and hold businesses to account for delivering for us. I am so optimistic about our continent because our young people are dynamic and they are challenging poor leadership on the continent. Fix the country in Ghana, campaigns in Uganda, Kenya, Nigeria, you name it. They are demanding visionary leadership. And for those of you who read the FT, you would have seen a spread in it which said, you know, young people take on old leaders in Africa or something like that today. Our young people are saying we need leaders and we will fight for those leaders. So these are the 5 things that we are proposing. But, you know, if you want to find out more, I can tell you about the timeline. But very quickly, there's one more thing, and this is for all of us on this platform and for all Africans out there. We must do a better job of telling our story, okay? 1/3 of coverage on Africa comes from non-African sources. You know, the AFP and BBC accounts for 1/4 of all the stories that are found on African outlets. So African media actually take stories from outside and report it into Africa. To date, 81% of these stories were classified as hard news, and they were mostly about conflicts and crisis and political corruption, etc. Now, I've shared with you some of the great things that happened in COVID. We need to be better at telling our story, the good, the great, and the ugly. We need to share what is happening to attract investment. If we want our financial ratings to improve so that we are competitive in borrowing, we need to share the good stories. And we need to share the bad stories as well to hold our leaders to account. It is our responsibility to do so. So on that note, if you want to learn more about what our ATR is proposing, if I could do a small pitch, join us on July 15th, where we will have our Africa Transformation Forum, where we will launch the Integrating to Transform report. And at that forum, we'll have a few precedents. And we would like all the young people on this forum and more to join us in asking the questions about how they are going to work together to ensure we transform our economy into one that we are truly proud of, one that generates jobs, one that creates equity, and one that can withstand future shocks. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will try and stop sharing if I can.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Mavis, for this indeed inspirational lecture. And we are very happy that you've taken and run with so many of the topics that we've been discussing in the past few days. And obviously they resonate because Asad has also been working on this with a large number of people. We have actually 5 minutes, and there is one question that has come up in the chat, and that's particularly if you could elaborate very briefly on the issue of digital jobs and how they benefit women more than men. You mentioned that. Could you say something briefly about that?
Yes, so Asad has been doing, Asad has been doing some analysis on youth employment and skills in a number of countries as well as across the continent. And what we are finding is that digital jobs require a set of soft core competencies. Mm-hmm. So skills around negotiation, skills around influence, skills around collaboration, etc. And somehow, when companies are interviewing tech experts, women seem to come to the table not just with the technical skills, but also more of these core competencies than we are seeing at the moment with men. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the digital sector offers a level of flexibility that works for women. So we tend to see a lot more flexibility, a lot more innovation being driven in the digital sector, which enables women to go through a career growth. So they can work at home, they can work in the company. There's a lot more flexibility for young mothers who want to work in the digital sector than we are seeing in other sectors. So it just seems to benefit women more than we are seeing for men.
Thank you very much for that added insight into how the digital economy can work and actually provide more opportunities for women. I find that very interesting because what we are planning as Include platform is a new research call precisely on digitalization of basic services in Africa, which is coming next month. So in addition to your very kind invitation to join your meeting of ASSET, I would also like to promote, say, this new call that we're planning, which will come out also in July. Let me turn now to the second part of our session, in which we're asking, looking at the reflections from 2 youth moderators about the future of Africa. And let me give the word, because this is indeed very short, I'm afraid, for the first reflection to Dr. Chiamaka Navachukwu, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Isa, and thank you very much, Mavis. Good afternoon, and I will go straight to the reflections because I do not have much time. My name is Chiamaka Navachukwu, and I currently support the AU Youth Envoy's office to coordinate the African Youth Charter Hustlers. Now, last week, I moderated a session at this conference on merging perspectives on decent employment for Africa's youth post-pandemic with a focus to build forward better. I'll be sharing reflections and insights on this, and because I'm very passionate about including young people in every conversation, I also had a conversation with some young leaders, especially the Youth Charter Hustlers, to weigh in on this conversation, and you will be hearing some of their reflections in my talk in the next 5 minutes. So first of all, as a background, about 500 million jobs were lost during the COVID-19 pandemic. That may not be news. And the majority of these job losses affected young people who, even before COVID, had a higher rate of unemployment as compared with the older population. For example, in Nigeria, the general unemployment rate was 33% as at the fourth quarter of 2020. But for young people between 15 to 24, that value was as high as 53.4% and 37.2% for those aged between 25 to 34 years old, even though they form 60% of the working population in Nigeria. And I say this because these are not just numbers to me. I'm a Nigerian, a young Nigerian living in Nigeria, and this is my lived experience every day. There are just no jobs. And it's even a double burden being a young African woman, because you have the so-called disadvantage of being young, which confers a higher disadvantage of being unemployed, and also being a woman, which also confers an extra disadvantage of being unemployed. So you see that the situation is even more precarious for young women like myself. So what are the challenges, major challenges that we identified? And I start with the challenges because in order for us to look to the future, it's important to understand how the past got us to the present. One, the private sector is not strong enough or diverse enough to provide employment for this youthful dynamic population. And I must bring in at this point small to medium enterprises, which are run mostly by young people. And those sectors are dealing with unfavorable policies, really high taxes, inflation rates that are just astronomical and through the roof, and they are struggling. So with a weak private sector, and high unemployment rates, you see that growth and innovation has caused our cities to suffer and has stunted development. The second is that a large proportion of our educational systems, and young people have complained about this several times. You see young people having to go outside of the institutions to upskill, to make sure that they are relevant to what is being asked for in the global job market. And they have to make these efforts themselves to be able to be relevant in the job market, because our educational policies are not flexible enough to deal with the changing times of what is required in the job market. Another problem is that educational systems also do not provide the opportunity to learn these skills that would later be important in the job market. Now, in the jobs that do exist, there's much to be desired regarding social protection, such as fair wages, non-exploitative and fair working conditions, and basic social rights like health insurance, parental leave, and etc. A great number of young people are also engaged in informal employment, which in itself may not be the problem as far as Africa is concerned. But the problem is that we do so with no safety nets. We do so in an environment with failing infrastructure, inflation, and sky-high prices of basic amenities like food, electricity, healthcare, and housing. Basically, being a young person in Africa many times means that you start your struggle 100 steps below your counterparts. However, there are opportunities for growth, and there are opportunities that we can learn from. Now, the first one, which came out strongly from our discussions last week, as well as my conversations with the hustlers, is that young people have to be at the tables to create these policies. There must be intergenerational co-leadership and collaboration. It is no news that on the continent, young people are largely missing from the big and important tables, even when they have the required experience and skill to do so. I mean, we saw, and Mavis rightly mentioned, we saw young people innovating and creating solutions, even with the barriers that exist. So many of them do have the skills to be at these tables, but they are missing. Young people have to be included from the very beginning of the processes and policies which we are looking at to build forward better. Oftentimes, we are included only at the end, many times to publicize what has been done or lead advocacy or to bring a youthful perspective in quotes at the end of a campaign that has already been designed and implemented. However, where are those young people during the ideation and the conception phase? And when we do include young people, do we ensure that we reach out to the best and most inclusive people for the job, or are we recycling the same people? I mean, we have had this set of young people for this conference, and then instead of making sure we get more people, we are using the same people over and over again and creating some sort of an echo chamber. Do we
Maka,
make
could you wind up as much as possible? Thank you.
Exactly. All right. So aside, the next recommendation that I would like to talk about at the end is that the African Continental Free Trade Area provides a unique opportunity for the explosion of the youth job market on the continent through intergenerational trade, removing barriers and allowing access to a wider market. Young people have already been engaging in interregional trade, even with the barriers that exist. So it is important at this time that they are included in the process. I had to buy something from a young woman living in Southern Africa, and there were so many barriers to pay, to get the goods and all of that. However, we were able to find a way around it. So I think that a good conversation for AFCTA going forward is, how have young people been able to innovate around the issues that exist, and how can we make this even stronger and capitalize on the innovation and the digital sector and the payment platforms that they have built to make sure that this is strong and sustainable. I will end with this. There have been several social movements on the continent calling to hold African leaders accountable and fulfill their social contract to provide for and protect their people. The majority of these movements have been led and driven by young people. There is dynamism, leadership qualities, and strength to be found among African youth, and the best possible outcome for us as a continent will be achieved when this huge potential is tapped into and young people are brought to, like I call them, the big and important tables to closely collaborate and work on policies together with our leaders. Thank you very much for having me here, and I look forward to the rest of the conference.
Thanks very much, Amaka. That's very inspiring. I'll go straight to Amanda, please.
Thank you, Isa, and thank you, Chiamaka. Excellent insights. My name is Amanda Kavagambe. I am trained as an economist and I run a development advisory practice in Kampala. I was asked to give closing remarks as a representative for the youth, perhaps from South Africa. And I figured the best way to do this is to showcase interviews with some of the youth-run businesses and learn what gaps they are addressing and how they pivoted during the pandemic. And so in this video, you'll hear from 3 companies, 2 of which are successfully delivering technology-based solutions for small businesses in the payment space and within the entertainment industry. And you'll also hear from a doctor who ventured out of the clinic into manufacturing PPE. I now hand over to Maya to share the video. Thank you.
Hi, Alan.
Hi,
Tell
Amanda.
us about Sente and how you're supporting small businesses.
So Sente is an account, a digital-only account for businesses. Okay. Yeah, businesses use Sente to do everyday business payments. We also do payment collections. So you're selling, I don't know, a product, water, bananas, you can use Sente to collect cashless payments. A business has a problem, right, that it wants to solve, right? A business like yours, maybe you want to pay per diems, or you want to pay a small supplier who brings you teas, right? And you are now sign here, sign there, vouchers, right? That is stuff that can go cashless, and the benefits are now you have visibility into every penny, you have control of every penny, and when your accountant audit comes in, it's nice and clean. Yeah.
Biogenics is a company that started in 2018, so it's a fairly young company, and our focus was on 2 critical areas: the imaging section in terms of diagnostics, and also sundries. Those are medical consumables, where we realized that there were gaps in supply, but also in affordability. So Biogenics went out to address that first. In the imaging division, we looked at refurbishing medical equipment and providing them at an affordable cost, hence making them available for many more people. Secondly, the area of medical consumables. We looked at manufacturing some of these PPEs and a number of other medical consumables.
Feza is a tech company focused on the entertainment industry. We've managed to work with over 100 musicians over a lifetime. These musicians in turn hire makeup artists, wardrobe designers, apparel, and their fellow band members. And this also has a trickle-down effect because each of these people have a dependent. The way we've managed to increase the livelihood, to increase incomes and sustainability of musicians is by one, increasing bookings of these musicians through our different networks, but also secondly, reducing the amount of costs they have on doing per gig whenever they go out to perform at gigs. And this is basically by buying a lot of the gear that the musicians used to use and giving it to them or hiring it out to them at a much smaller rate than they used to.
Given the pandemic, how did it affect your business? And what learnings would you be taking forward in the future? How did it also affect your customers?
So the pandemic was a very interesting period for us. What happened after the pandemic, now teams are remote, customers are remote, and you still have to continue doing business. So the value of what we bring now started to become very clear to businesses.
The onset of the pandemic presented a number of challenges. At the onset, we immediately decided that musicians should not stop performing, and because the industry was locked down, they did not have any other source of income. So we decided to build a pay-per-view platform. Pay-per-view platform basically allowed musicians to get content and put it online at a fee. So clients would be able to go to this pay-per-view platform labeled Feza.live, pay for a show using either a card or mobile money, and then be able to watch the show. This in turn managed to have musicians sustain themselves during the pandemic. So yes, certainly the model will change. We don't know where exactly it's going. There are a few plans, but the model will change.
COVID struck, and there was a great need for masks and other PPEs. So we set out to manufacture KN95 masks and surgical masks.
So we're looking at businesses and what problems they have around cash management, spend management, payments, payment collections, and solving that for them.
We would like to continue learning. We would like to continue adapting and developing the model to be able to sustain one more youth, to increase the number of musicians that we work with, because we know this has a direct impact on youth, basically.
Thank you very much, Amanda, for that video, which gives a very good insight into how important young entrepreneurs are and how indeed they are already working very hard in generating their own jobs, where that in very innovative ways. I'm going to go to my concluding remarks for this session in the interest of time. We've talked in this session about innovations and digitalization, and that is very interesting for us as Include, because that indeed has already been a topic also that we've taken up because of the interests of our members of the platform. And we're going to launch a research program very soon on the digitalization of basic services, as I just said, and that will be done in July. So keep it in mind, because that offers opportunities for doing research in a comparative fashion. The second thing that I wanted to mention is that the research on COVID and post-COVID recoveries that we've talked about, that we discussed in one of the first sessions, that is now being we've done the comparative case studies, those are completed, and the synthesis is being written as we speak. And there are negotiations with the publishers going on for a book in this area. So we will keep you posted as we make progress in that area. Finally, I'd like to say a few words of thanks to a number of people and institutions. First, I'd like to thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands for making this conference financially possible, and particularly for all of you who have played a very active role in making this conference possible and participating in the different sessions. A very special thanks there goes to Paul Lutjens and Martien Rutte for their support in getting the program together. They are on our steering group of the Include platform. I'd like to give a thanks to the platform members. That may sound as if we're thanking ourselves, but still the enormous input, creativity, and contributions that have been made by the various members in this conference have come out very clearly, and we are very thankful for that as a steering group. And also for me personally, it illustrates the strength of the platform over the years, which has only grown and has become more diverse and more innovative and strong. The Include Secretariat, which supports the platform, is a consortium of different groups, different institutions, namely staff from the African Study Centers in Leiden University, from the broker in The Hague, and the African Economic Research Consortium in Nairobi. And this consortium, as such, has become much stronger, and indeed is even having a huge impact in the discussions, in the policy debates, and we see increasingly it being recognized across African countries, in the Netherlands, and also in other European countries where these policy debates are going on. So I would like to thank the Secretariat also for all the work, the consortium that's being done. I'm going to say something about what is going to happen right at the end of this, and then I'm going to hand over to Marlene for a word of thanks. We have the Zoom channel is going to remain open for another 30 minutes so that we have the chance for more informal discussions and meetings with each other. So please stay and don't leave before that time. I'll hand over to Marlene. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Isa. And thank you very much to all the speakers and participants who have made this virtual conference such a great venue to exchange on the prospects for building forward more inclusively and debates between research, policy, and practice. As the outgoing coordinator of Include, I'm also very proud to say that in my mind, this conference was an Include conference optima forma, in the sense that we really engaged in multi-stakeholder exchange, and the conference itself was developed and implemented in equal partnership, reaching beyond the usual suspects, and not only virtually on Zoom, but also live streamed on YouTube for the first time in our history, and with simultaneous French translation to also welcome French participants. And to recap what that, let's say, multi-stakeholder grounding means in practice, let us look at the registrations for the conference. And Robin, if you could share the slide with us. Here we are showing figures on the participants, and that means excluding the speakers, Include platform members and members of the Secretariat. In total, 175 people have registered. This is the highest ever recorded for an Include conference, and clearly is the result or the advantage of going virtual, having a virtual conference. What I think and what I really want to emphasize is especially important is that more than half of the registrations came from Africa. Of course, there was a keen interest from the Netherlands, notably from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but also from other people in Europe and even beyond. In terms of the stakeholder groups, we had approximately 1/3 participants from research, 1/3 from policy, and 1/3 from other sectors, including the private sectors. And what I think is especially relevant also in the setting when discussing youth employment is that we had many participants below the age of 35, more than half. So that's really also an achievement. Finally, I would like to share a big thank you to the team who made all of this possible, who put together the program, prepared all the sessions and the speakers, who worked behind the scenes to make sure that all the virtual logistics are in place and ran smoothly, who made notes, who ensured presence on social media, etc. So a big round of applause to Maya, Annika, Kim, Robin, Hannah, Obadiah, Hannah twice, Casper, Hodo, Manon, and especially Agnieszka, who took the lead in coordinating the whole event and kept us all on our toes. Excellent work, very well done. You certainly deserve a good rest. But of course, we will meet as a platform and secretariat on Friday. And I hope you can stay on for some informal drinks.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Marlene. Also, big